Okay, and our AD just arrived in time for the beginning of the session. Perfect. With that in mind, welcome to SML on this Friday, sunny Friday afternoon. Well, let's get started. I hope everybody in this room or watching the recording have noted the note well, including the IPR policies and code of conduct. Okay. Okay, so we're using Miteco. This session is being recorded. We have a note taker. Thank you, Pete. Agenda. So with Hans-Jörg's agreement, I reshuffled the agenda a little bit to start with vacation notices and use cases so that we kind of warm up a little bit. And area director wants to say.
Just one quick announcement. Arndt Gulbrandsen has volunteered to assist at the chair. He will start, I'll appoint him after this meeting, so like no change right now. I'm looking for anyone who might want to assist further, as Alexei was expressed more interest in attacking this problem from the floor than from the chair. So we'll be like this for a little while, but I'm looking for a volunteer.
This was my last slide, so yeah, well done. That's fine. No. Well, it was a bit speculative, so we'll come back to that. So anyway.
When you get to me, I'll do that again.
No, I think that's sufficient. Yeah, so I'm very pleased to have Arndt as a future co-chair. He unfortunately have to leave before the end of this session, so he's not here. Right. So any objections to going vacation notices, use cases, and then going to the main spec and trust document. I think I'm going to be slightly flexible with times. If we'll try to spend more time on the main core document after use cases, but if we are making enough, taking a bit more time for the main document, we can, shorten the security and trusts section or not. We'll see how it goes. Right, with that. Let's get vacations, yeah? First.
Test.
Yeah.
Works well. All right, welcome everybody to our second ever formal SML working group session here. And as Alexei said, I think we do it quite similar to Prague, that we start with a very particular use case, which is email specific in a way, and that is structured vacation notices. Next slide, please. So yeah, so the scope is it's a particular example use case which exists or is particular to the email domain as such, or tied to email as an application. And basically what has been done or what has changed since the last IETF meeting in Prague. So there were some minor fixes in the document. There's two a little bit larger things that were done. So one is about use cases similar or related to vacation notices. We will come to that later. And a small section about on how to implement this in the document. I'll also talk about this a little bit. And there is now also a first implementation of that. So in case you want to have a look how that looks in code, you can see here the GitHub URL. And there will also be some screenshots in the presentation. So you probably might already get an idea. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just as a slide for those of you who are probably not that familiar with vacation notices as such. So this is typically a standard feature of many email clients, groupware systems, webmail systems. One interesting thing, if you look at it a little bit, is that the IETF specs don't really cover a lot in terms of vacation notices. So it's mainly a feature which has never been fully specified to a certain extent. The only exception beyond some side notes in some RFCs is actually, of course, CIF action of a vacation notice, which is mentioned here, RFC 5230. However, if you look at it, it's more like the action, so it doesn't even define more or less like the conditions under which you apply the vacation notice, which in many systems obviously is a date where you say I'm on vacation from this and this date. And this is actually also in many systems you can only do it like that. Of course, if you have fully fledged CIF rule access, you can do any other rule as well. But probably it's not what the typical user is doing. And this is a little bit important for this draft because, of course, it leverages a little bit the kind of CIF rules that are out there in practice. Yeah, I think everybody of you probably who is using email has seen one or the other of these in the past. So you know, especially now people are here on IETF, you get a message from people, an auto reply when sending them an email which says, well, I'm basically on vacation, I'll be back next week. Talk to my colleague if you need something urgent, things like that. And obviously this is something you need to read by yourself. And you need also to decide how to act upon this. And this is what makes it, I think, a good example use case. Next slide, please. Because the idea is this is actually some information which in most cases is very well structured because the things you write in your vacation notice are basically, or that define your vacation notice is actually the time frame when you're away. Probably somebody else to refer to in case people need an emergency contact, things like that. And so it could be, or it's an easy win in some way that you try to formalize this a little bit, and then clients could be enabled to actually, provide some assistance to users based on that information, and users would not need necessarily read the manually written text. Yeah, and we will also see some examples of how that could be leveraged in the next slides then. All right. So this is the current proposal for JSON LD structured data representation of such a vacation notice, or out of office, how it is mentioned here. You see there is a start and the end date. It's not considering hours because typically people don't say I'm like half day away or something like that, but that's probably I've never seen any systems out of all the groupware systems, and so I've seen where you can actually specify that. So it's typically in days. There is forwarded, which means basically that you can say, you might have noticed this phrase in many of these messages, like, will it be forwarded to somebody else, or will nobody basically read your email while you send it? And there is also the notion here of potential replacement persons, how it's coined. So I'm not even sure if this is a very good understandable name. So there's proposals accepted for better naming if it's unclear for some case. But the idea is these are persons one can address in replacement for the person who is absent in order to proceed with matters. And for these persons, one can basically define here either an email or a phone. Obviously, all of these things with respect to replacement persons are also optional. And finally, there is a very short written additional note which the user can add. Yeah, that's basically how it is right now. Next slide, please. And this is actually a vCard representation. It's not really in the core of the draft because it's actually the way we implemented it in a reference implementation on the side of the sender. Like, so I get back out of office vacation notice from somebody. And of course, in order to do further things with that in the future, I need to store it in a certain way. And in that particular system, we decided to do that within the vCard of the respective person. And just define some X properties for that. The reason I'm showing this here is, first of all, somehow to give a little bit the big picture. Of course, every system could do this in a different way or store it in the normal database, whatever you have in place for your particular system. One open issue a little bit probably also for the group is if this makes sense to be included in the draft, either for just informative reasons, and there might be a little second level aspect of interoperability here, because if I do migrate or export my vCard, I might want to take this information with me. Even though, of course, this out-of-office information is not typically very enduring, but I might, over time, collect some out-of-office for my contacts, for the given year or something like that. So it might even make sense for such a use case to have that, the opportunity to take that with me to another system in a way. But as I said, it's a little bit a side aspect, but I would really like to hear opinions on that, probably, if somebody has a strong feeling about that. Next slide, please.
Yeah. And just quick note. I think my hope as a chair, just stay. Oh, sorry. Is that we can also adopt this document, and then if the working group decides to adopt it, then it might be a small issue whether this is in scope for the charter or not, the vCard bit.
If the document is in scope, you mean?
No, if the vCard properties is okay to define in the same spec or not, but I know it's a little thing, and we can figure it out. So yeah.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so here we see some actual screenshots from our implementation. I hope everybody can see it. I have to look a little bit here on the main screen. So basically, on the left-hand side, you see the Radcube standard user interface on top for out-of-office messages. So you can do two things in Radcube and in many other systems. You can either edit raw CIF rules, and there's in many cases also an additional specific display for things like a vacation notice, which means like the user doesn't have to do it manually as a complete CIF rule and understand CIF. But basically what is entered in that form is automatically translated in the background in a CIF rule. Some systems then even hide these rules, these special rules from the normal CIF rules which you have, or you might not be able to edit them or something like that. That's basically actually the display on the right side. This is more or less a similar rule, but just in the detailed CIF-specific editor. Yeah? So that's two different user interfaces Radcube has in place for editing these rules. And as I said, everything above these advanced settings is basically the standard which you already have in place. And what we added here is basically these two buttons and the numerical value at the bottom here. And so once you enable this thing, and this is why I included here this detailed view, is it will more or less automatically generate the schema and populate and generate the schema snippet, which you have been seeing on the slides before. And enter this actually in the CIF rule, in this vacation action, so that it is sent out to people that want to contact me during my vacation notice. And you also see here that, for instance, this is something that's done anyway. The start time, end time is translated in a CIF rule condition on top. But you see also these dates and end times are then encoded here in the structured data. So that the email user agent of the person that is getting back this out-of-office message can interpret it. There is one more thing here beyond the standard. I also mentioned that already in the presentation in Prague, because there is one additional thing you can actually achieve with this, and this is the second button, which is basically attaching the out-of-office even to regular mails outgoing. Yeah, so this is like a little bit of an experimental feature. So imagine I know I will be in vacation just in 2 weeks. I can already decide to include a structured vacation notice in messages outgoing in the meantime, so that people in contact with me can already store that in their address books. And for instance, if I let's say Vittorio is on vacation and I have that in my address book and I want to drop him an email just a day before he's leaving for IETF, my email client could then leverage that information and say, okay, you are writing Vittorio, but be aware he's traveling next week, probably rather give him a call or so. So this is the idea of this preemptive vacation notice. This is actually not attached here in this CIF vacation rule action, of course, but it is separately attached to outgoing emails by another technical mechanism here in the tool. But of course, that's tool specific. Next slide, please. So how does it look then for the person on the other side? So that is basically trying to contact the absentee and then receiving a message. So here on the left side, you see an example for that. Of course, that is client specific and just for illustration. So you see, for instance, at the top of the mail, that special highlight of that message that says basically, so this is like from a preemptive message. So it's a regular message that was sent, but it includes some out of office information. This is specially displayed at the top. There is a second screenshot here, which is like for if I want to proactively write an email to somebody who I know is absent. And in this case, it's not very beautiful, but it basically, the mail client informs you that the user is currently out of office. And of course, you can just ignore that and send the message nevertheless. But you could, for instance, also suggest as an email client to change the recipient or put this person on CC immediately or something like that. But this is all options, of course, which email clients need to decide how they want to do the user experience here. This is a little bit out of scope, of course, for the RFC as such, but of course for illustration. Yeah, next slide, please, if there is no question here. Yeah, that was basically the way the spec is mainly written. There is some follow-up questions here. So one question is, there were some people noting use cases which are not covered yet by that data which we currently have seen. And the question is a little bit if this should be a draft to be adopted, if that should be extended as a scope for that draft, or if the draft should better be kept on focus like this is here. So one thing might be a change of address, something also mentioned in an older RFC. That means a person is soon maybe changing the email address, or the company is merging, something like that. And this is an information you could similarly convey via this kind of structured data. A similar thing, which in a way email clients currently cannot understand, is no reply. Basically means this is coming from an email address which cannot or should not be allowed to send emails to. There is a generic issue of updating contact data that's a little bit related probably to the first point. And there might also be the idea that some people might want to include some additional information in that vacation notice for informative purposes. So like if I'm to IETF, I might want to tell people I'm at IETF to let them know and to let them probably follow what's going on. So that could be an optional addition to that. And there might be other cases as well. Next slide, I think we can probably have, if there's no points, no discussion in the meantime, in the end. Yeah, this is a proposal for the implementation guidance in the spec. So one is that this should obviously purely an feature which is optional. So users should not be forced to include structured vacation notices if their email client supports this. If there is a structured vacation notice, there should still always be a human readable vacation notice, obviously, because you cannot know if the email client of the party receiving the vacation notice supports it. On the other side, there is a question like, what do you do if you receive conflicting vacation information from a user? Like a user might decide to, update the vacation time frame at some point. And so you need to decide which ones to follow and not. And also one question might be if you want to exclude this kind of structure, include this kind of structured information if you forward a message to somebody else. So let's say Vittorio sends me an email with his vacation information inside as a preemptive vacation notice, because a normal vacation notice I typically might want to forward anyway. But if that's a regular mail, obviously, and I want to forward this mail to Alexei, that might expose vacation information of Vittorio, which Alexei may or not need to know here. Yeah. All right, next slide. All right, that's already the final slide. So as Alexei said, one question would be if the group thinks this is worthwhile to pursue further and to adopt in the working group as such. As I already mentioned also, the question is if this vCard stuff should be included. I would also be happy if somebody is interested to help co-authoring this. I mean, I think it's not incredibly a big draft or a complex draft, but still I think it would make sense to have some more thought about this. And of course, any other feedback and input is very valuable. Thank you.
Okay. Let's have quick comments. Pete?
Get to pre-type my comments into
Yeah,
the notes.
I know. That was
yeah.
cool.
So first of all, adoption seems fine. It seems straightforward. The vCard question was actually interesting to me, and I've always had sort of a problem with, especially with this particular mechanism, getting my head around where in the layers this all fits. But a vacation notice, the vacation itself seems like it should be a calendar object of some sort, because it's got a start date and an end date, and then it's got embedded other stuff. And the other stuff, like the replacement person, might be a V card or a J card in there. And I can imagine implementing this such that if I put a vacation notice and check it as such in my calendar, that the email system would notice that and start generating the SML to do this stuff. So I think it makes sense to me to have these objects be JCal objects and JCard objects, but I'm not sure how that fits together with how the mechanism gets implemented.
Maybe you can stay at the mic shortly if I'm allowed to respond or ask.
Of course.
I'm not sure. One thing is probably important to distinguish. So what is proposed here to put in the vCard is not the vacation information of the absentee itself. So if you are using that system and you say, I'm absent, I'm at IETF, and I want to have that included in my outgoing out of office sent to other people,
right?
This will not go to the vCard. So this is solely done in the CIF, yeah? in your normal out of office workflow. So you don't have to add any further information there. The vCard is only for other people sending their out of office messages to you. So, you know, if I'm on vacation, you send me an email, yeah, you will receive my structured vacation notice, yeah, and then the question is, how do you want to persist that? Because your email client might want to remember I'm on vacation, so that if you try to write me an email, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, take that example. So
Right.
you go on vacation, your email client sends me a Hans-Jürgen's on vacation.
Yes.
I would think
Yeah.
that it would be handy to me for that to be a calendar object, because I might want to enter that into my calendar that says Hans-Jürgen on vacation from here to here.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the kind of data that I want.
That's absolutely correct. I just wanted to ensure in the first comment that we are
right, because there's the
with that.
configuration information
Yeah.
for the sieve, and then there's the what structure you're sending me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
the replacement people might be J cards or V cards, because I may want to enter them into my address book. And
I totally get your point on
Okay.
that. And I also see your point that it's sort of weird in that case to store calendar data in the address book, obviously.
Yeah.
The reason, I just want to explain the reason why this is currently done, or why it's suggested here. It's basically done because we are also leveraging the address book for a trust mechanism. So we say only, consider this if this is already a person in the address book. And also the question is a little bit, if by default, let's say this is widely implemented and you receive like 20 of those, do you want to have all of them automatically stacked in your client, like random person X is absent or something?
and that comes down to UI and the way I implement my system.
Right.
And so, maybe Braun is going to make this grand unified fast mail integrated with the calendar, but you have a vacation notices calendar that's viewable separately. Who knows?
But actually, this is why this vCard thing is just, as I said, for illustration, as one example, how you could store it if you want to do it easy and not do a complicated thing in a way. And obviously, that's a very good suggestion with that calendar option. This is something that can be very easily done on top of this, right? Nothing, it's just a very simple implementation by the calendar client to show you exactly in the message notice in my calendar explicitly, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
I will admonish people to just hurry up a little bit, just because we are 10 minutes over time. I'm happy for everybody who is in the queue to come up and say their piece, but also if we start going this way, I think we want to adopt and do it in the working group as opposed to here. Jim?
Hi, Jim Fenton. Yes, adopt. You asked the question about are there clients that have finer granularity than date? Microsoft Outlook allows you to specify a starting and an ending date and time. So maybe that answers that question. The other thing that they allow is to specify whether the vacation message goes to only the same domain or elsewhere. And that kind of brings up the idea, if you've got something that's machine readable, you might actually want to have some kind of an indication as to the sensitivity of the information in that vacation message, so that if somebody forwards it outside the domain, it might get stripped off or something like that. Or that the message contains more information for the internal recipients and less for the external ones.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Vittorio Bertola. Yes, of course, adopt. I promise to help since Prague. I hope I will help. About the storage, I think that maybe that could be an informational part, but definitely not normative. So I think. But my point was that also according to the comments in the chat, I think that there are privacy considerations around this, and in general around all these structured data, because in the moment in which you turn data which is not machine readable into something which is easily machine readable and processable and forwardable, and then the practical privacy risk becomes much higher. So I first started by saying, okay, maybe I can provide input for a privacy considerations section in this draft. But then I thought, do we need something horizontal throughout all of SML? So would we rather have a general reasoning on how we should, or should we do it by draft?
We will adopt a general security and privacy consideration and trust document. So I think yes, but I think if people contribute text, we'll figure out whether it goes to this document specifically or the core document on trust.
Yeah, because in general, there might be the need for some kind of control by the sender to the recipients of the level of conditions for forwarding. And so, because I see some DPOs of some big customers that have maybe 10 million mailboxes in Europe screaming at the idea that this data continue going here and there.
Ken Murchison, FastMail, +1 to adopt. I also had some thoughts along the lines of Pete regarding iCalendar and vCard, but I'll hold off until we actually get this in the working group, and then we can bike shed that stuff down the road.
Shall I do a quick hand raising thing in the tool and just, I know, I mean, there are actually more people in the room than I expected, to be honest, on Friday afternoon, but, and I know this is not binding. We still need to double check on the mailing list, but I want to have an indication how people feel about it. So should we ask the working group to adopt this document? If people can voice their opinion. Okay, going once. Yeah, that's and one don't care, no opinion. That's perfect. Okay, I think terminate. Thank you. This is useful information for the size of the room. This is like overwhelming, support. But obviously, we'll check on the mailing list. So thank you. Okay. With that. If we can maybe, this is more to kind of indicate what kind of uses this might have. Unless people have clarifying questions, maybe we don't spend too much time on this one and try to concentrate on the base spec.
Right. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So as Alexei said, this is a supplementary document or an optional document in the charter. But to help the group also discuss and understand, what might be use cases here, what might also be use cases that should not be addressed, and so on. So what has been changed in the document? The draft got adopted last time in Prague. There were some smaller changes, and there were some things I will particularly shortly cover here in the talk. And this is this time to go a little bit into some particular use cases and discuss it more in depth. So in Prague, we were more having a high-level view of, what categories of use cases exist. And now we will probably have a short look on what these use cases might look like, or what they mean in particular, a little bit like we did in the previous presentation. There was also some discussion on the group or on the mailing list on further things. If we have time, we might also shortly cover that. Thank you. Next slide. So first use case, I think, is very easy to grasp. Everybody of us knows that a little bit. I think this message is from a service. I try to hide it a little bit, but you see it's still in the path from our friends of Fastmail. It's basically a confirmation code you have to enter, or second factor you have to enter when logging into a mailing list software, and you receive that by email. Many of those of you know also that similar thing getting by SMS. And obviously, the simple thing you need to do here is to copy paste it, right? But it's still a very manual process in a way, and this is a super tiny help that basically could allow an email client to understand this is the thing that needs to be copied, and probably offer you a button or something like that. So you might have noticed in some of the SMS messages which you get, you have this kind of option to directly copy the code that was sent. If somebody knows more about that, that would be very interesting. I tried to do a little bit research on that, and it seems that this is currently just guessing and heuristics, so that basically SMS apps do try identify code : space, and everything that comes after is supposed to be put in that thing, which obviously is not a very nice thing. And this would basically provide some help for the email case. Yeah, I think next slide. Or there's a direct question.
Michael, do you want to, is it quick?
Okay.
Clarifying question?
Yeah, it's a clarifying question on that expires header.
Right.
Doesn't have a time or a zone.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And I've regularly complained to places that give me 10 minutes and explain to them, yeah, the spam processing on your random thing takes 27 minutes. So it's always expired.
Right.
I don't think that this is the document to tell people they're idiots for that.
Right.
But it would but I really like the expires header. But gosh, I think it needs to almost be down to like the millisecond.
Yeah.
Right.
That's absolutely appreciated. I mean, to make sure this example is just we actually have it implemented, but it's not well thought through the model. Yeah. So
So maybe when you redo that slide,
Yeah.
give us 30 minutes in the example, just so that people think, oh, I should have a longer thing, and put the time expires.
No, it's a good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Second example. So you see here on the left side, so many of you know you are on the web, on a website or somewhere, and it says.
Sorry.
And it says share with somebody else, right? And you're typically offered like Facebook, instant messaging tools, other social networks, and so on. And there's also good old email sometimes. Yeah? And I ask you, try it out. It's very funny how different services do it. So some will, in the past, and there is still some existing that will give you a form, which of course is a little bit a spam problem because the email is sent on behalf of the site typically. Most typically nowadays will just have a mail to URI scheme attached to it, and it will open your email client. And the left-hand side is what happens if you, for instance, do that on Spotify and launch K9 email on Android. And as you can see, it will basically paste the URL into the body. And then you can write your email around that. But those of you who know what happens if you share it via Facebook or instant messaging tools, it's not just the URL, but you get a fancy little card display with, in the case of a music, the album cover and something like that. The way that typically works is there is an informal standard by Twitter called Twitter cards. This is some metadata in the HTML, which you can look up in your browser. And it basically was introduced by Twitter for pasting URLs into Twitter. This is basically how they do render then this kind of information. And so this use case with structured data could be very easily also used within email, because many of these services like Spotify just don't only have the Twitter cards, but also they already have schema annotations within certain pages like songs. You can also look that up in your browser. And what you can do here is you can just pull that out of the page and embed it within the email. The nice thing in the case of email is also typically there is a tracking aspect involved in that regarding the image. Yeah? So if you, for instance, send it in an instant messaging tool to somebody else, the instant messaging tool might download that on the recipient side. And so the service knows, okay, this and these people have received that kind of shared item. And within email, when you share it here in that kind of structured information way, you could already include the image thumbnail within the sent mail from the receiver side, and probably wouldn't have something problematic on the recipient side. And the other nice thing, of course, is due to using the structured information here again, different than in an instant messaging tool where you just have a nice card display, but the instant messaging tool has no idea, is this a cooking recipe, is this a song, is this something else? Your email client would know actually this is a recipe or this is a song, and could, for instance, allow to open your favorite music service or something like that. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so this is just maybe this is shortly quite interesting. The interesting question is, in that case, what do you do with clients? So when you send this kind of structured information in the message share by email, what do you want people to do for those clients that don't have the possibility to show structured data yet? And so what we did here in that case is that we automatically generate an HTML version of that thing, yeah, which is just the fallback for those clients which cannot do the rendering by their own, so they just get a standard rendering, in this case of an album or a song. Yeah. All right. Another similar case, I think I don't even need to talk too much about it, is location sharing. So in many instant messaging tools, you can share your location or some location with people, and you receive a similar kind of card rendering about that. And obviously also if you try some map software and try to send a location by email, is the same case actually as before with the media. It's just a URL. And so again, basically it's very similar to the other use case. One interesting, I think, future question, which is currently out of scope of the charter, would of course also be how to deal with the fact if such information updates over time. So would you want, in such cases, also probably to have means that allow the initial sender of the email to update that information either in another message, which could, of course, result in a lot of messages, or if you would have some other means for that. But yeah, I think that's probably too much of discussion for the moment. Next slide, please. Another use case that was, I think, recently discussed in a lot of email-specific gatherings of people is emoji reactions. Many of you might know that from either RFC 978, where you can specify which kind of Unicode emojis you add in an email and what they should mean. And on the other hand, there is some bigger vendors like Office 365, Outlook.com, or Gmail that allow you to basically react on a message you receive by a thumbs up, a heart, or something like that. But at the moment, this is not interoperable, so it works very well within their ecosystems. So if you send within Office 365, that all works very well. If there is one party involved using another provider or just a normal email client, basically the kind of message you receive from Gmail is the one you see here at the bottom. So it's mainly a textual representation of that. Yeah. So and yeah, there might be this might obviously something you could do with structured data also, in order to make this more interoperable. And that's also maybe interesting if you think about things like activity pub or activity streams, which actually, this kind of Fediverse networking software, there actually you already even have representations for these kind of interactions defined in a structured manner. So that could even be reused or make interoperable with these kind of services. Next slide, please. Yeah, one more generic case is actually newsletters. So newsletters, I think, are still a big deal in the email world, used by many marketers and people that commercially send around emails, if we like it or not. But I think it's still one of the most powerful use cases that drives the adoption of email to a certain extent, also especially from a sender side, and where a lot of effort is put into. And if you think about, for instance, this is an excerpt from the New York Times cooking newsletter here, and there is obviously always recipes mentioned within these newsletters. And well, currently these newsletters are mostly human readable. There is URLs inside that lead you to the website, but for instance, you might want to share certain individual recipes with people. You might want to store them somewhere. There exist, for instance, apps to work or to store recipes. And so if you would include the recipe structured data in the newsletter, underlying the actual textual representation, you could have all these kind of add-on services with that. And obviously that would not be applied to this recipe use case, but you could think about similar things if you have a music newsletter and so on and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this is already the final use case. This is actually part of some larger hallway discussion we had in Prague, some people. And so the idea is a little bit, one of the initial arguments in the SML BOF was that email is sort of your API a little bit, in which you interface also with services you subscribe to. You come to Australia, you subscribe with a e-scooter vendor or something like that. You receive an email, hey, this is e-scooter vendor X, welcome to Australia, this is your user ID, this is your link to reset your password, and so on. And if you're not traveling but at home, like it's your electricity provider or so on, you might even receive emails continuously with your invoice, something like that. And what many people do is probably they have something like a folder where they put all of their electricity provider emails into, but this is some work to do somehow, and probably it would be nice if your email client would understand this is my whatever contract or something like that, and similar to contacts, calendars, tasks, could provide a view of that and maybe even know, okay, this contract is terminating, or this is maybe the whatever contact information. There is even a side effect on that if you think about the whole thing of spam or fraud protection. So you could even think about, in that case, once your email client does understand this is a trusted message from a service provider, you could either establish encryption more easily. That's probably one idea. And on the other hand, you could also try think about conveying information about acceptable URLs to be sent by that provider. So you could, for instance, teach your email client initially, this is your contract with your electricity provider, and these are the 3 or 4 URLs which the electricity provider is allowed to send. And afterwards, your email client could actually spoofed email addresses from that sender, could block it and say, okay, this is not established. Okay, so you see, this is a little bit of a more advanced use case to think about, but yeah, it's probably also worth mentioning initially. Okay, next steps. There is no urgency here, as this is, first of all, something we did not promise to submit to the ISG, but I think it's worthwhile, since SML in a way is a little bit abstract and has a lot of potential use cases to discuss and keep such a list. And yeah, therefore feedback always appreciated. I think I have already some volunteers, like Vittorio volunteered to also support this document. I think Ben Buch, who is, I think, not here this time, also volunteered to help. But yeah, any input is anyway welcome. Thank you.
Okay. This is adopted document. If people have very quick comments, please come. I don't think we need to debate whether a particular example, should be listed. That's not. Yeah. Thank you.
Very quickly, just I'll point to DKG's comment that a lot of these are going to need some serious discussion of security and privacy considerations, and you probably want it in this document. The other is we want to think about maybe a discussion in this document about how you develop the semantics for different kinds of use cases. Because and just the quick example is you did the copy to clipboard, and I went, don't make a copy to clipboard one. Make a this is a confirmation code, because copy to clipboard might have all sorts of implementation things where this is a confirmation code can be implemented in all sorts of different ways. So coming up with some rules for how we think about semantics might also be a good thing for this document to talk about.
very good comments. If I may
Sure.
very shortly comment on it, very, very helpful. I think for the first point, since this came at a second time now with the trust and security things, I think this is even in the charter of the working group that we have this explicit draft for that to address that. So this is why this is kept out of this presentation here a little bit on purpose, but on the other hand, of course, it's even good that it triggers such kind of questions and observations, because it's just the idea that this might help us actually better understand and design the trust and security document in the end, right? And in a similar way, I agree with you about the modeling thing, even though at this point of time, we are, I think, not yet in that stage, but also deriving such kind of recommendations and observations is, I think, a very good thing which we at some point should think about how this could be structured process-wise. Yeah, sorry. Any more?
Okay. DKJ said trust and security don't belong on a separate draft. They shouldn't be tackled on the end. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, well, the current draft trust and security document as presented last time, there wasn't enough support, so we'll see about adoption, and then maybe we'll combine it with the main spec. We'll figure it out. I think it's a logistic thing.
Is also in the queue?
Okay, DKJ, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, just briefly. I think the pattern that I've seen where you do trust and security in a separate document is that it doesn't really get taken seriously, and it's treated as sort of an adjunct. And I think this is actually core to what we want here. You're not going to see a mail user agent be willing to adopt this without getting egg on their face if, we just say, oh, copy to clipboard, and then it turns out there's some sort of clipboard overflow or clipboard spam thing that can happen, right? Or forward email, and all of a sudden you're exfiltrating your address book. So I really think that each scenario in the use case should contain or should be close to a description of how it could be potentially abused. We all know that email is ripe for abuse. Keeping that close to the use cases and thinking about describing how we think about it will help us build, I think, the appropriate instincts for as new use cases come up. So that's why I would lean towards keeping that together. But anyway, I'm glad we're talking about this. I'm not saying that don't do it. I just think we should keep the trust and privacy and security questions pretty close.
I mean, very short comment. It's interesting, a very valuable comment, because there was a lot of discussion on that very initially before the working group was founded. That this obviously is one of the major things for this whole working group, which is why that was singled out to be a dedicated draft in a way. Yeah? So it's interesting. One can also see it the other way around, of course. You will find certainly already also in the core document that should not be adopted before also the trust published or released before also this trust document is ready. But for instance, I found it a good idea also, for instance, to include this explicitly in the use case document. I will note that down and try to put it in.
Okay. Right. Let's get going with the main spec.
Yes. All right, so the scope again here is this is main specification except the trust and security parts, which is a separate document. What has been done since IETF 118? The draft got adopted. There were some smaller things in the document fixed, but also some more bigger things, which I will mention in the presentation. There is also a first demo implementation of this, which we partly have seen already in the previous presentations, which you can also download, and which we will see a little bit of it also in this presentation. Next slide, please. So the thing that probably is most foundational, besides security and trust, is on how to put the structured data within the email. There was a lot of discussion about that, about the different options before the Prague meeting and during the Prague meeting. It's also mentioned in the document. The actual trade-offs are quite clear. So there is actually existing work right now, which is probably technically not so clean, basically meaning that the structured data is sort of put into the HTML body part of the email in the script tag. Whereas, of course, if you would design this from scratch in a cleaner way, you would, for instance, use dedicated multi-part related, multi-part alternative structures here. So that discussion, in a way, we did to a certain extent already in Prague, and said at some point this is a fundamental thing to be decided in a way. It's orthogonal to most of the rest because it's merely an implementation kind of thing. The current status is, in order to decide that, one needs to probably a little bit better understand also the consequences in terms of backward compatibility, so what is already around. We started doing some research on existing messages containing structured data, which is not that easy because obviously that's all individual emails, yeah? So you cannot just crawl the internet or something like that. So this is ongoing and probably something we can have more information about and go into the direction of a decision at the Vancouver meeting. But yeah, just to shortly mention here. Next slide, please.
And I volunteered to investigate because like in my non-chair capacity, I will have an opinion about this. So I will try to build a case or see if we can investigate alternatives and what is possible here.
All right. That I think it should actually be a skipped slide, right?
Today.
Yeah. These are just same as here.
No, that's the next one.
No. I think we
You want to skip this one as well?
Yeah. That should be 3 slides now, which are basically backup for that kind of thing. That as well. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things we didn't discuss in that detail or only very shortly touched, and it probably is interesting to discuss here right now, is basically these cases. Or maybe just going one step back. I think one of the important distinctions this draft makes is this case about what is meant as full representation and partial representation, just to repeat that shortly. The idea is mainly that there is a difference if the structured data in an email does partially represent the content of the human readable part of the email, which means that the email client must ensure that the user still must be able to read the human readable part, because otherwise information will be lost. So the newsletter I've shown you before, this New York Times cooking newsletter, is a good example. The mere fact that there is a single recipe attached as a structured data element doesn't mean this is fully representative of the newsletter experience, right? On the other hand, you might have the case, let's say, of a flight reservation where an airline sends your booked flight to you, and basically the information which is in the human readable part is exactly the information in the structured part. It's when is your flight going, what is the flight number, la da la da la da. So in that case, obviously the email client could either proceed with some automated ways if you instructed the email client like that, because you said like, if there is a flight reservation, act this and that upon of this. Or the email client could decide to just represent this in a different way based on the structured data. And now going to that partial case, so there might be coexistence of structured data in emails and the HTML email part. Yeah? So there might be scenarios you still consume HTML emails, but you also have structured data which somehow annotates these emails. And the question is now, how do these particular cases interrelate, or what kind of implications come from that? And one kind of obvious case is, let's say, again, for that recipe case, you have an image of the recipe. Yeah? So there is like the salad bowl or something like that. You have the image in the normal MIME structure for the HTML email, but then you also have an image property within the structured data. You might want to avoid duplicating this kind of information. The proposal here is actually quite straightforward. You already know that from HTML email as such. This is using the CID URI scheme for internally referencing content elements from the MIME tree. So far, so good. I think even not much needs to be done. This is already covered more or less by the underlying formalisms to a certain extent. I think there is just 2 things that might need to be considered. So I'm not sure if there might be corner cases based on that. So can this be abused in some way, or can this lead to some difficulties in certain situations? So if somebody has an opinion on that, that would be interesting. Second thing is, I think this would probably in the document at least need some guidance for the case that structured data is removed from the email context. So if the email client would, for instance, allow you to export structured data separately from the email, as far as I understand, the CID URI scheme is only defined within the MIME context. So the email client at least would need to cover that ideally in order not to break things.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, Jim Fenton. The main case that I can think of where the human readable content is maybe a subset of the machine readable content is when you've got like tracking links and things like that, little pixels and also those sorts of things. I think need to consider what the potential privacy implications of that are here, and whether there needs to be the ability for the recipient of the mail to either accept or not accept that sort of thing, that invisible tracking.
Yeah, I think it's a valid thing, but I think it's unrelated to the issue on the slide, in the sense of, well, CID will never be. CID is only used inside multi-part related to reference to other body parts, so it can never trigger the tracking bug, basically.
Yeah, it's not exactly what you're presenting here, but it's a thought that occurred to me more generally when thinking about visible data versus machine readable data.
That's also how I understood it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, with issues where you have a proposal on the slide, I suggest that should be your default for next revision of the draft, and we also conform. I will conform on the mailing list to make sure that people are happy with this.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Next slide is the opposite way. So now there is a question. On the left-hand side, again, you have said recipe newsletter from the New York Times. And now you have, as I said, structured data about certain recipes mentioned in the text. Yeah? Without any additional means, your email client will not know, actually, to which part of the human readable message a certain piece of structured data basically belongs. Obviously, you could do some heuristic text matching in a way, but first of all, it's not strictly necessary if there are other ways to do so, and it might obviously be not as good. So the question is, would it make sense to allow authors of these kind of emails or newsletters to denote actually that a certain piece of information within the newsletter refers to a certain piece of structured data, so that your email client can probably leverage that by whatever, adding a certain pop-up or whatever kind of information. And the proposal here is to use these data minus a star set of attributes, which are sort of used for similar use cases somehow in annotation of HTML, also on the web, in order to reference basically the ID elements from the structured data. So in that particular case, you read it like in this left-hand side. So you see there's already a URL for that recipe, but that's just pointing to the website. But there is an HTML href element, and the idea would be basically to add that bold-faced data ID, and the HTTPS part is basically the ID part from the schema you see on top. And by this means, the email client could basically understand where it belongs to.
Can I ask it's just thing that occurred to me? Can this be any URI type? It doesn't have to be HTTPS, right?
Right.
Like it can be URN or whatever.
I mean, this is basically JSON LD spec. I don't know by heart. Sorry. I would need. It's uncommon, at least, to do another thing.
Okay, this is the thing to check, because again, in this case, HTTPS URI is used as an identifier, not necessarily to be resolved.
Right.
Like, like when you reference XML schema, for the schema elements, you don't expect them to be necessarily published on the web, but it might accidentally be resolved. Again, there is a security consideration. Yeah. Pete?
I'm unconvinced that this is necessary or desirable. I think over the long term, If SML gets implemented by clients, what you're going to do is you're going to drag the recipe into your message. It might appear as a piece of text with a link that says sheet pan chopped salad recipe, and which you can change, and it will have a pointer with a CID to the actual structured data that exists in the message. I think this sort of quick cheat way of figuring out is probably not worth the dangers of implementation, and you can do it with hard links the same way people implement inline images now. If you put it in the attachment, and it's an attachment, if you drag it into the middle, it appears as the image with a CID pointer to the attachment.
Short question. I mean, obviously you can do, I mean, this is back and forth, this slide and the slide before, right? And obviously you can omit one or the other by introducing a way to, do one direction, and obviously the client can do the math to resolve all that.
Right.
And I sort of understood you sort of proposed like that. But in this particular case, at least the CID would probably not be enough, because you would want to reference, you would want to say this recipe references this thing in the human readable part, right? So you would need something beyond the mere CID, which only can refer to media, right? Like to a video.
Well, I guess I don't think this case will come up. People will either put it in purposely, like the previous slide, and therefore the client will already know to highlight that piece of text with the CID, or they're going to not want it referenced, and this is using this sort of heuristic opens up problems and isn't worth the risk. Just my gut.
Okay.
Okay. All right. DKG?
Similar to Pete, I'm trying to understand what even the use case would be. So why would you need a pointer going in this other direction? That is,
you will see it on the, you will see it on the next slide. Is it okay?
Okay, yeah, please advance.
Because this slide, if I may shortly, and then maybe Daniel, you can comment after it. It's basically a continuation of the previous slide, or a special case. So here you see, for instance, how this can be used. Yeah, right. So so the pop-up you see on the left side is basically based on the structured data, and it, for instance, contains here let's say there is a recipe app within your email client or your mobile phone or so on, and you could continue with that recipe in that app, or maybe more comprehensible with a song, you can then open it in whatever kind of music application you would have. And this kind of thing is obviously more difficult to do in the HTML email as such. So this is the idea why you would have opportunity to do an interaction with an human readable message, but where this part of the human readable message is carrying some structured meaning, and this kind of meaning you want to act upon. And very shortly, what this particular slide is about is even a second level distinction. Very shortly, and this distinction is like, as probably Pete also put out, you can put the recipe in completely, like it's on the right-hand side in the human readable part. And then, of course, this visualization, like on the left-hand side, would be sort of duplicate, right? So it looks a little weird when you see the same kind of pop-up showing you the same thing you already see in the human readable part. But of course, the email client does not know, because the email client might only understand the machine readable part, but the email client might not understand how the editor designs the human readable part. And so the idea here is to have even a second parameter, which could help distinguish for the email client to understand if the entity which exists as structured data, as on the left-hand side, is just mentioned by name, for instance, or if it is really like a first-order representation, and could accordingly adapt in terms of the user interaction that could be offered. So it would probably then not show a fully fledged pop-up, but just a small list of actions or whatever.
Okay, I don't think this answered my question about how this is useful. This may be more confused.
Okay.
I mean, okay, imagine that we had a recipe MIME type, XML/recipe. I don't know. I'm just inventing it. Yeah. We can currently attach a recipe as a MIME part, in the email,
Mhm.
and we can put a link to a CID.
Mhm.
And if your mail user agent knows how to deal with recipes,
Mhm.
then we have the link and it points to the recipe. You can ingest it into
Mhm.
your recipe program. And
Mhm.
if you want to just work on the attachment on its own, you can
Mhm.
also ingest it as a recipe. And I
Mhm.
don't understand what this is, like, as a user who's reading email,
Mhm.
I don't know what I get from this. Maybe
Mhm.
this gives the sender of the email some more power and control over my mail user agent, but maybe I don't even want that. Like,
Mhm.
I want to know what is in the message, and
Mhm.
I want to know how to deal with it, but I don't see why I need to have this reference, this bidirectional reference. I just don't. This isn't. If this is supposed to motivate this reverse pointer for me, it's not doing it. Sorry, I might just be thick, but I'm not seeing it.
If I may answer, I mean, it might be a little bit difficult to resolve the whole thing because the part you mentioned with the MIME type is actually a discussion that happened very early on the formation of the working group, like on the distinction if structured data should be represented in individual MIME objects, or rather, like in this case, in a graph data structure which is embedded in the email. So that is something like a very fundamental distinction in a certain sense that might probably for the moment here take too much of the session to reiterate on.
I'm not trying to relitigate the MIME question. That's a separate
Okay.
thing. I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
I don't understand why you need pointers back and forth here. Like what do those pointers back and forth give you? As a mail reader, am I gonna see this other thing? If
Yeah,
so,
sure. I
I'll
mean,
see it where it's pointed to.
I mean, you literally see how it would work, right? Or you see an example here. So what it would give you?
No, what I'm telling you is I really don't actually. Like, what's the difference between the left and the right hand side here?
The left hand side and the right hand side is not like the without and with. So this is just merely for how so basically the pop-up you see in both slides, maybe that was not clear enough, is based on the structured data. And it's just an example, right? The underlying thing you see is the human readable part, right?
Okay.
And on the left-hand side, the human readable part is text only. So the recipe you see is only mentioned as sheet pan chopped salad with chicken.
Yep.
Right? On the right-hand side, you can even see the image in the human readable part, for instance, right?
Yep.
Okay, so the idea is if for some reason, for instance, in this very particular case of the New York Times recipe newsletter, sorry but it's a similar case for any other for some other newsletters. You do have a main entity probably in that newsletter. This is the recipe of the week or something like that, and you have additional recipes like this one here. And obviously, not all of them are rendered fully fledged in a way. And so the structured data can sort of help you to get additional information on these, let's say, non-focus recipes in your email client by having this kind of pop-up. So that's basically the point here for the user. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is obviously, this is an arbitrary example with the recipe here, but you might think about the same thing with many other different use cases as well, right? So if you
can I try to maybe rephrase? I think so. The pop-up and the action that associated with the link is generated from the structured data.
Exactly.
Right.
Sorry.
So and possible set of actions that you want to do. So, right.
Did that help Daniel a little more?
Help
is the question. Okay.
That's okay.
I will say I think I understand the motivation. I just don't think it's a good one.
Okay.
Well, I think that people need to think a bit more about this, and maybe Hans York, you will try explaining this again, and we'll see. I think the CID reference were more obvious. I think that in this direction, I think, I suppose, well, there are two separate open issues, so I think that's fine.
That's fine.
Happy to move on?
Yes.
All right.
If everybody else is.
Okay.
All right. Getting to other questions. And this is actually a section in the document which is so far we were discussing structured email, how it behaves within a given message, like, how do different parts of that email interact and so on. Whereas the part that comes now is a little bit, okay, how does structured data relate to other messages you have in your mailbox or you exchange with other people? And one obvious case is if you forward a mail manually. So we are not talking necessarily about automatic forwarding to another account of yours or something like that, or like aliases, but about you receive an email from somebody. I made that example before with the out of office. I get an email by Vittorio with this out of office. I want to forward that email to Pete. And then obviously there is a question, what should happen with the structured data in that case? And there might be use cases actually where the structured data is useful to forward. So again, if I have the newsletter with a cooking recipe, I want to share the cooking recipe, there is probably nothing wrong about that, or it would even be counterproductive if the structured data would be removed. Again, for the out-of-office information, this might be at least a certain kind of data leak if the out-of-office information goes to a third party which was not originally involved. And so the question is a little bit on how to deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah, can I put myself in the queue as a participant. Yes, so you do mention it on the slide that legacy clients that understand that at this point this will be majority of them. They will never strip on forwarding, just because forwarding is, it's quite a well-known algorithm, and you are possibly asking for some modifications to strip certain PI related structured data, whatever. So I think no matter what, we'll probably need to have a security and privacy considerations explaining the effect of this on legacy clients. And I don't know whether this is all we can do, and whether we can agree that in certain cases you will need to modify how your forwarding happens if your client understands structured data. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there is, indeed, for this issue here and the following issues, there is not yet a proposal in that sense, but it's more or less also about getting an idea what people think about it.
DKG was first.
Oh, sorry. We don't hear you?
Hey, sorry, just having trouble clicking buttons. So we have this problem today without structured email. This question of, can a message be forwarded? Like, I was recently forwarded a message over a mailing list that would have let me unsubscribe the person who forwarded it from another mailing list, right? So there is a generic issue with email about what, if there's pieces that we think should not be forwarded, how to annotate them so that at least compliant clients can do that. And I don't know that this should be solved specific to structured email. I think if we're going to try to solve that, we should be trying to solve that generally for email for clients that are mature enough to understand it. We're never going to fix the legacy clients. Right. But if there was a way to annotate that certain links, say, should not be forwarded when you're in the process of forwarding, that would be a great thing to have. I just don't know, like, that's relevant for, arbitrary elements of the DOM, even in a text HTML part. So anyway, I just wanted to flag that I'm not sure this may not be something that needs to be solved with SML particularly. This may be something for MailMate. I don't know.
Yeah. Very good point. Agree. And a good example, actually. Yeah.
I agree with DKG. And I mean, nowadays, many implementations are, if I forward it and it's inlined stuff, that is, if it's CID stuff, I do include it. If it's attachment stuff, I don't include it. At least I've seen that from a few clients. And I think it's going to have to be a case-by-case thing if we expect implementations to do something different than that, some very general sense of what's good to forward and what's not. And it's bigger than SML. So I think we can mention these things as the examples come up, but I don't think it's something we're going to solve in this document.
Okay, fair enough. And I assume you'll type in your own. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If there's no, I don't see the queue, so you need to. Okay, sorry, I didn't see this. Okay. Okay, so this is about replying to structured email. So again, you might want to, or your email client might allow you to reply to a structured email normally. So for this particular case, there is a flag in the IMAP RFCs historically, I think since the beginning, called answered, like a system flag. And the question is a little bit, that would not allow the client to understand if in some case there was a structured email sent in response to that, which you also would not want to do twice. Yeah? So in theory, a user could respond, obviously also in real world, a user can respond infinitely, an infinite amount of times. However, the email client will initially put a hint there that this email has at least once been replied based on that flag typically. For structured email, it might be a little bit different, that you might not want even to do an infinite number of responses in some cases. For instance, if you want to confirm a flight or something like that based on that. And so for that case, you might want to have a similar flag or a parallel flag, which distinguishes like the human readable answer or a regular answer versus a structured data answer. That's basically what it's about. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, I'll just give an example of something else, which is somewhat similar that we already do with MDN requests. Have you acknowledged that you've seen this, received this message? We have similarly defined a $MDN sent flag, which basically, if there are multiple clients viewing the message, only one of them will generate a response, and then they will send a flag saying that it was actioned. Maybe a bit of a bike shed, a little thing. Answered structured might not be the right word. Maybe it's actioned or something. But I'm sure we can figure it out.
One side question on this. I was a little bit confused when I looked it up by myself also about the MDN send, that this was, I think the dollar says it's a user flag basically, right? So historically it's
a convention, yes.
But I think it was probably also in MDN send already by design that one didn't want to extend the system flags because that would be too big of a deal, I guess, right?
Yes, everything starting with the / is a system flag. You cannot really extend them without updating the server.
Right.
So, and use of dollar is a convention. Why we decided to have a dollar, because some people also registered flags without a dollar and they are kind of still valid. Yeah, I think it's dollars kind of signifies that there might be some standard behind it or it's defined somewhere.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
But other than that, semantically, there is no, dollar is not magical in IMAP in this case.
Well, if there's no more question.
Quick chair interrupt. We have, I gave you half an hour. We have 1 minute left. Do people want to continue with this or shall we switch to trust? How much? Shall we continue? It hasn't changed. The document hasn't changed since last time. So how many are left on this one?
I don't recall, should be like only maybe 2 or 3 of those, and then we
okay. How about like 5 minutes, and then I'll ask again.
Okay, so maybe let's do the next 2 or 3 in a row and have questions after them if there are any, right? Okay. Sure. Okay. So a little bit specific case is error replies, and this is basically the issue. So I might receive a structured email, right? And typically I might not want an automatic response, like if that structured email was broken for somehow. Let's say my airline sends me a flight reservation. I don't want my client to tell the airline you have broken data or something like that inside, right? And that is also okay for both parties probably. However, if I'm to confirm that kind of message, like let's say again, this is a flight reservation and I might have a structured email answer like I confirm the check-in or something like that, if my email client does something wrong on that structured email, or if probably the flight is already concerned or canceled or something like that, I might want to have actually a kind of error reply to that, because otherwise I safely assume, that has been processed and everything is fine. So this is basically the use case here. There is not yet a good proposal. Probably MDN DSN style mechanisms might be the thing. Probably something to discuss on the list or maybe later on, but maybe next slide first. Okay. Another thing is updates. So if I have human readable messages and there is something wrong or no more recent, I can just send another email like, Ken, our meeting has changed, has moved to this and that date. The reader can understand it, everything is fine. If I have structured data, of course, I need to help the email client to be able to understand this is basically an update of the previous email, right? There is a historic header called supersedes, which sort of has this kind of semantics. So there was some proposal already from prior discussions, I think in Prague, that this could be used. So this is actually in the room for this. There's always a little bit of probably a problem of using some historic header. Not so many people might be using so far and so on.
Yeah, I think Pete might be looking slightly confused. But supersedes would define for Mixer. But I mean, this comes up, so it has the same semantic as supersedes again.
In general, this also might even have some side issues, like what happens if the data which is now updated has already been processed in some way. So there's a whole lot of stuff that comes out of this. So I guess this is an issue we will anyway discuss in more detail at later times and won't solve by today for sure. Next slide, please. Okay. And I think that were already the across email things. Very shortly also to this, because I think also this is nothing we will solve by now. There is things like calendaring, where we also have a situation like in a distributed client server setting, like where I have multiple clients acting on the same mailbox, there might be multiple portions of software acting on my behalf. Like for instance, I might have a calendar configured to process on the server already from a webmail. But I might also have my desktop client, my mobile client want to act upon that calendar. And this is sort of something I need to handle manually right now. So there's actually no way, as far as I know, how my different calendar clients know of each other if I even have multiple ones. I think this is basically a problem that is left to practice, which means that most people will just have a single calendar. Yeah? But the problem, of course, is a little bit more complicated in here. Because once I start having structured data in emails, I might have cases where I want to have something like a CIF extension on the server side, doing some stuff with the structured data. And of course, in that case, clients should be aware that this has been processed already. So this is the core basically of what is happening here. So the question is, first of all, a little bit again, do we need some sort of flags probably that help certain clients to be informed again, this was already processed or something like that. So this is one category here. There might be even a longer term thing here, which is, I think, out of the scope a little bit of the charter, but I wanted to mention it nevertheless, which is more about, would we not even need, similar to the message store API, a server-side API on mail service supporting structured data for the structured data, so that all clients somehow have a common view on the structured data and don't need to do a local processing in some way. But yeah, again, this is probably, Daniel.
Thanks for this. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the scope here. I generally understood structured email to be about how we define the contents of a message and how mail user agents would interact with it. And I'm now hearing this scope creep out into questions of, say, IMAP representation or JMAP representation, server-side flags, things like that. So as you may or may not know, I am an advocate of trying to get end-to-end encrypted email fixed, and I'm concerned about how much information leaks to the mail servers. So I'm a little bit confused about when we say defining appropriate flags, you're really talking about leaking some part of the mail user agent state to some potentially adversarial server, right?
No, but I mean, the question here is like, for instance, CIF rules at the moment. I mean, you typically process them on your email server or your provider's email server, right?
Right.
And so the question is, and this is an open question.
CIF rules must be provided to the mail server because they're
Yeah.
going to take action when your mail user agent is not online.
Exactly. And so this might also be for some cases of structured data, you might want to, have that functionality. I mean, somebody? No. Okay. So, this is actually not, actually what to do with the structured data in that sense is out of scope of the charter, right? But it might not be forbidden that somebody wants to, like if I have a CIF rule, like if there is a message coming from somebody at Fastmail, I can have that, right? But I might also, in the future, if my, my email provider or my email clients can understand this, I might also want to create rules for that, right? I mean, we don't have that extension for CIF right now, but I might want to do that. And even if you just remove the server part on that, right, you might still have multiple clients that might want to understand that another client already acted upon something or so.
So, I mean, just to reinforce this, I think constructing this as, well, you might have a Civ thing that's going to act on these. I think that's the right construction.
Right.
And that's, I as a user am going to configure my Civ to work at the server level or not. I think trying to embed lots of implementation detail into the objects themselves is the mistake. So don't think about this as, oh, we've got to come up with this metadata. Think about this as SML's job is to define the objects, define what the objects mean, all that. And if we need Civ rules, that's a separate document and a separate topic.
Right.
Because what DKG is worried about, which I'm also worried about, is if we start thinking about we have to bubble semantics somehow into the SML objects themselves, now we're going to start expecting things to be exposed to the servers, which in ways that we might not want to have happen. So these issues seem orthogonal and seem like things we should define elsewhere, not as part of the SML itself. We can talk about this more offline.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just posted a comment. I think I agree. Civ extension is currently not in scope, but if we decide here that it will be helpful, we can figure out where to do it. So
I think it's not technically necessarily out of scope. It's just not currently.
I'll double check the exact wording, but yeah. Okay.
Anyway, yeah. Okay. I think we can skip the next one, which is, I think we can have that the next time. It's also not something urgent for the draft. So as for next steps, question is, generally, I think there might be still also open issues in the core draft as such. So things like we identified here, but other things that are not yet identified and might need to be addressed. So that's a call to everybody to also consider, like, is there unknowns here that need to be thought about beyond obvious things, also like the trust and security thing we will come to. We already talked very shortly at the beginning about the general idea of putting structured data within the MIME body parts. We also talked about the identifier things, I think, which might be an interesting thing to continue also on the list and at the next meeting. Maybe there's also the question again about co-authors here. I think Alex offered also to join here a little bit, but it would probably be very helpful to.
I think in general, having Hans-Jörg editing all the documents is not great. As in, he's honestly asking for more co-editors, and I assume different co-editors for different specs. I volunteer to help out with the base spec, assuming I have co-chair, which, as we already discussed, we got it. So, okay. I think we're just about out of time, so let me just come back to the chair slide. Next step. So, Murray announced that I'm going to have a co-chair done. I think at some point I probably would still like to step down, so he probably will be looking for another one. So if if you want to help, please talk to him or me if you want to know what this involves. Based on today's discussion, I will start adoption call on the vacation draft, which seems people are interested in. And yeah, as already mentioned, finding co-editors. So out of the 4 documents, so the course spec and use cases are adopted. So then the next thing is to adopt vacation, and then we really need to think of. I will discuss with Arndt, and we'll probably do an adoption call on trust and security document, knowing that it is fairly incomplete. And but I agree with earlier DKG's comment that I don't think we should send the course spec to ISG and then wait for the trust and security document to wait. I think we should either they're sent as a pair, or we actually just maybe there is a good point. Maybe we'll combine them into one. But well,
I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. And with this, I think we are out of time. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank Pete for taking notes.
Exclude